Hello everyone and welcome back to my Warhammer 40k guides. I am Brady and today I would like to give you guys a video talking about how to pick your first army for Warhammer 40k. I assume that most of my viewers have already picked their first army, so this video is mainly intended for people who have been on the fence for a while when it comes into getting into Warhammer 40k, and for people who can't decide on which army they think they would enjoy playing. This video also could apply to people who are looking at getting a second army or a third army, so if that's the case too, then continue watching the video. So in this video, I will go over everything that should be considered when deciding which army should be your first, or even your second or your third if you get that deep into the hobby. Before we get into the main topic of this video though, this video was sponsored by themagnetbaron.com. They offer magnets of all sizes, magnetized movement trays, magnetized flight stands, and they even offer fully built magnetized models. So if you're looking at picking up some magnets to make transporting your models easier, or just to be able to change the loadouts on your minis, then check out themagnetbaron.com. A link will be in the description. So now let's cover everything that I think you need to consider when purchasing your first army or your next army in Warhammer 40k. The first thing to consider is what matters more to you out of these three things: lore, aesthetics, or army strength on the tabletop. If you highly value the lore of Warhammer 40k because maybe you've read a bunch of 40k books, then pick the army you like the most from those books, since that would be your motivation to want to build, paint, and play the army. If you're not that big into the lore and just want to play a fun miniatures game, then pick an army you like the look of and then look into the lore after if it interests you. If you don't highly value the lore or aesthetics of an army, and would rather just jump right into competitive play, then I would pick one of the factions that seem to be the strongest at the time. If you need help figuring out which factions those are, you can refer to yourself to my most recent Top 10 Armies video to get a good idea of which armies are currently the strongest. The main downside to picking an army this way though, is that the game is constantly changing, and armies that were once the strongest may not stay on top forever due to nerfs Games Workshop may release in FAQs or chapter approved, which is basically the balance patches for Warhammer 40k. So if you're picking an army solely off of its strength on the tabletop, then be aware they might not remain the strongest for very long. So if you are going to pick an army based off of its strength on the tabletop, then I would recommend you at least pick a strong army that fits into one or both of the other two things I previously mentioned, which would be if you like the lore of the army, or if you at least like the look of the army, because at least you can still enjoy your army after that if it inevitably gets nerfed. I think these three things are important because they are what give you motivation to want and build and paint your miniatures. If you're big on the lore but don't like the lore of the army you chose, and you only chose it because it's strong on the tabletop, then you might not find the motivation to build and paint the army, and you might find yourself starting a whole nother army sooner than you expected, or losing interest in the hobby altogether. Same goes with looks. If you're really big on how armies look, but you don't like the look of your own army, then you might not find the motivation to build and paint those models. And if you're big on competitive, but discovered your army is in the garbage tier, then you might not find motivation to build or paint, or even play the game. So I would recommend you figure out which of those three things matters to you the most, and then pick some armies to choose from based off of those, and then go through the rest of these tips from this video, and narrow down your choices till hopefully you get one army that you can collect and play. The second most important thing to consider when starting an army, at least in my opinion, is if you're going to enjoy the way the army is played. This can be the hardest part of picking an army, because if you haven't played the game and don't know much about playstyles and units available, then you won't really know where to start. This might also clash with step 1, since the army you like aesthetically, lore-wise, or strength-wise might not fit into the playstyle you think you would enjoy. For example, let's say you picked Tau in step 1 because maybe you used to watch Gundam Wing when you were younger, so you really enjoy the look of Tau in their battle suits, or maybe you really enjoyed their lore, or maybe you discovered that they were a strong army. But then let's say you want to play a melee-centric army that focuses around close combat. Well, Tau and close combat don't really mix, so this would be impossible to do, at least while still trying to win games. Because sure, you can use your Tau in close combat if you like, but you'd probably lose every game you played against a semi-competent opponent. And if you lose every game you play, you're probably not going to enjoy playing Warhammer 40k, and you might consider building another army or quitting altogether. So with that said, let's cover what each army can do so you can decide if you think you would enjoy playing the army. Also, ways you can determine what you think you will like and what you think you won't like. Compare this to other hobbies you may have, like video games. Let's say, for example, you play League of Legends, which is a very popular video game for the computer. Let's say in League of Legends you play an ADC, which is a ranged character who shoots people from far away. Maybe you really like kiting people and staying back and shooting. If that's the case, you probably want a shooting army. Or maybe let's say you're playing a tank who likes just running up and taking as much damage as possible and absorbing everything for his team. Well then, in that case, you might want to play a very durable army. So if you do have any other hobbies that include games and different playstyles in those, figure out what you like in those, because that might help you figure out what you like in Warhammer 40k. With that said though, let's actually go over what each of the armies have to offer in Warhammer 40k. For shooting, we pretty much have every army in the game, since almost every army comes with guns, but some armies do it better than others. The best shooting armies in my opinion would be Astra Militarum, any Space Marine variant, Tau, Drukhari, Craftworlds, Custodes, Knights, Imperial or Renegade, Admech, and Necrons. The only two armies that aren't that great at shooting, at least in my opinion, would be Orks and Chaos Demons. So if you want an army that revolves around shooting, then I wouldn't pick either of those. Orks might change in the future, since at the time of this video they don't have a codex and are still an index army, but when their codex is released, they might get some better rules when it comes to their shooting options, so my opinion on them might change. As for Chaos Demons, they do have some units that can shoot and do it well, but I don't think it would be optimal to make a whole list around their shooting, since their melee options are so much better. So if anything, you'd have a mix of shooting and melee, but mostly melee if you played Chaos Demons. For close combat or melee armies, pretty much every army in the game can pull this off, except some armies do it better than other armies. And those armies would be Chaos Space Marines, Chaos Demons, Blood Angels, Space Wolves, Knights, Imperial or Renegade, Custodes, Orks, Tyranids, and Drukhari if you play Covens or Cults. These armies are the best in my opinion when it comes to close combat. So if you think you'd enjoy close combat, then these would be the armies to go with. The armies that cannot do well in melee, no matter how hard they try, are Tau. Pretty much every army in the game has access to at least a few units that are decent in close combat, but Tau pretty much have nothing. For psychic heavy armies, there are a few standouts: Thousand Suns, Ynnari, Craftworlds, and Grey Knights. Almost every army in the game has access to psychic spells and can include them in their army, but Thousand Suns, Ynnari, and Craftworlds have the best psychic support in the game and can have full lists built around their psychic phase. Grey Knights, however, are decent at psychic too, but are outshined by the other three armies I just mentioned. But because they get many bonuses to the psychic phase, I still decided to include them. Again, almost any army can have some sort of psychic support in their list, but those ones I just mentioned do it the best. So if you enjoy the idea of psychic spells or magic, then these would be the best armies for that. Armies that cannot do psychic spells are World Eaters from Chaos Space Marines, Black Templars from Space Marines, Khorne Demons from Chaos Demons, Drukhari, Tau, Knights, Imperial or Renegade, Custodes, and Necrons. Necrons have their own spells that technically aren't psychic, so you can still have a pseudo-psychic phase with them, but because they technically don't have psychic spells, I included them here. As for the rest of the armies mentioned that don't have access to psychic spells, those armies don't get much of anything in regards to spells for themselves, but some of them do offer relics or traits that can deny spells to at least give them some sort of psychic defense. If you're cool with using allies, then you can always ally in other factions to cover the psychic stuff for you, but if you want to play one faction and only one faction, then you will be stuck with no psychic phase when playing those armies. And then we have durable armies, which means armies that can take a punch and keep on going. These armies would be Custodes, Death Guard, Nurgle Chaos Demons, Grey Knights, and Knights, Imperial or Renegade. These armies are the best at standing their ground and have great defenses, whether it be through good saves or high toughness. So if you think you want a very durable army, then these are the ones to pick from. And so that covers it for the different things that each type of army has to offer. So now let's get into my third piece of advice for how to choose your army. And the third and final thing I would consider when choosing an army to collect and play would be to consider how often you find yourself getting bored of monotonous things. If you're the type of person who gets bored really easily doing the same thing over and over again, I would recommend considering how many allies the faction you've chosen has to offer. For example, let's say you pick Tau as your army, but you know that eventually you will become tired of playing with only Tau models over and over and over again and building Tau models over and over again. Well, Tau doesn't really have any allies other than other Tau seps, so you're still stuck with the same models even though they get slightly different rules, so your only option here would be to start a brand new army from scratch if you wanted to spice things up. So if you know you're the type of person to lose interest easily if you run out of options, then pick an army that has a lot of allies like Eldari, Imperium, or Chaos. Eldari, Imperium, and Chaos armies have tons of units and sub-factions to pick from. You'll almost never get bored. Let's say you pick Blood Angels after deciding you like the lore, look, or the strength of the army, and you also liked their playstyle. Blood Angels are an Imperium army, meaning you can ally in any other Imperium armies. In order to do this, you don't need to purchase or collect a full army of allies. Instead, you just need to collect a small detachment of allies that you can throw into your list to spice things up. For example, you can buy yourself a single Imperial Knight to throw into a Blood Angels list once in a while, or even a small battalion of Guard, or a Spearhead of Guard if you like their tanks, or even Guilliman from Ultramarines or Celestine from Adeptus Ministorum. It's pretty much impossible to run out of things to collect and paint for the Imperium, Chaos, or Eldari armies, at least when compared to other factions that are stuck by themselves like Necrons, Tau, and Orks. So if you know you're the type of person that loves options and you get bored really easily, you can pretty much collect a main faction as your main army and then a bunch of small detachments of other allied factions to change things up once in a while to keep yourself from getting bored. And eventually, if you discover you like one of those allied detachments better than your normal army, you can always turn that allied detachment into a full army collection if you would like to do so. And that pretty much covers all of the things I would consider when deciding which army I would like to collect and play. There are definitely more variables in this when it comes to making a decision, but the ones that I talked about I think are the most important. Some other variables might be the budget you have when collecting, because some armies are cheaper than other armies to build. Maybe you found a full Blood Angels army for cheap on eBay, so you went with that even though you know nothing about them. Or another variable might be that you want to play something different from everyone in your playgroup, and since everyone in your playgroup might play Imperium armies, you decide to go with Chaos to be different. With these two variables, I think they are okay, but you might discover that the army you bought for cheap might not be that fun to play because it doesn't suit your preferred playstyle. Or picking an army just because you want something different from your friends might lead to the same thing. So personally, I would follow the tips that I gave in this video over anything else, but again, that's only my personal opinion. When it comes to you and how you want to play your army, build your army, and collect your army, you do what you want to do, because you're the one that's going to be building it, painting it, and playing it. Unless, of course, you can afford to pay someone to build it and paint it for you. So make sure you like the army that you've chosen, otherwise it's going to feel more like a chore than anything when it comes to actually building and painting your army. Well anyways, that's it for this video. If you enjoyed it and learned something from it, please hit that like button and subscribe, since it does help out the channel. And if you want to be notified when I make new videos, make sure to hit that bell icon as well. And if you want to help support the channel even further, you can do so on Patreon. A pledge of $5 or more gets you access to the Almost Pro Gaming Discord channel, where I can help you with basic coaching and list building. And it's the best way to support the channel to allow me to continue making Warhammer 40k content full time. So if you would like to help support the channel this way, I will have a link for the Patreon in the description of this video. Well anyways, thanks for watching the video, I hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you in the next one. Happy wargaming!